Hello, and welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Meg King, Director of the Science and Technology Innovation Program, which studies the policy implications of emerging technologies, including commercial drones. With us to moderate today's event on that topic is Wilson Center Global Fellow Rick Whittle, author of the book Predator about the drone revolution. Over to you, Rick, to introduce our impressive panel and lead the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Welcome to the webinar, all who've tuned in today. And I especially want to welcome and say thanks to our speakers today, who are impressive to say the least, and who've generously agreed to bring us up to date on a major evolution in aviation. Now, notice I said evolution, not revolution. The revolution is how our invitation to this event put it. Well, that's because I drafted that invitation. And a few years ago, I also wrote a book called Predator, The Secret Origins of the Drone Revolution. Now, I stand by the word revolution in my book title because the advent of armed drones since the war in Afghanistan began in 2001 has disrupted military technology and tactics in a revolutionary way. Drones have changed and are still changing the way war is waged, creating new threats to worry about and raising major issues of ethics and law. But what we want to talk about today are not the armed drones. We want to talk about unarmed civilian drones that can be used for practical and commercial purposes. And as I prepared for this webinar today, I realized that in civilian life, there hasn't really been a drone revolution at all. In fact, 9 years after Congress first told the Federal Aviation Administration to sort out how aircraft with no pilots aboard could safely share the air with traditional aviation, in civilian aviation, drones have barely made a dent in the way things are done. In 2013, 8 years ago now, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos rather dramatically revealed on CBS TV's news magazine 60 Minutes that Amazon was working on using octocopters, small drones, as delivery vehicles to carry packages of 5 pounds or less to their final destinations within half an hour of departure from a fulfillment center. Bezos suggested that service might be a reality by 2018 or so. It will work and it will happen and it's going to be a lot of fun, he said. Well, my packages from Amazon and other companies still arrive by truck, nor are there any airliner-sized unmanned aircraft carrying cargo through the skies aside from a few test flights. A commercial drone revolution simply hasn't happened. But a commercial drone evolution is clearly underway. Google Wing, a division of the company formerly known as Google, and some other companies are doing an increasingly serious amount of drone delivery of small packages in, forgive the unavoidable pun, pilot programs. Google Wing drones are delivering household items like food and coffee in Australia, Finland, and Virginia, and will soon start doing the same in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. So in 3 countries, or 4 if you're from Texas, whose natives say it's a whole other country. Google Wing has made more than 140,000 drone flights already this year. Another company, Zipline, is using drones to deliver medical supplies and personal protective equipment from a depot to a medical center in Charlotte, North Carolina, over 2 routes at distances of 20 to 30 miles. And is asking the FAA to approve other routes in that state. Some people say Europe is ahead of the United States in drone delivery of small packages. A company called Manna is delivering coffee, food, medical supplies, and other items directly to consumers in several Irish cities or towns. Various players have looked at developing larger unmanned aircraft to perform a variety of missions, from cargo delivery to firefighting to carrying passengers. And here in the United States, the FAA has created test sites or ranges in 7 states where government and other entities can test and develop larger drones and technologies for them, train operators to use them, and develop concepts of operation. Excuse me. But publicly, at least, Boeing, Airbus, and other major aerospace companies who've looked at the possibilities or worked on such aircraft seem to be moving extremely slowly if they're doing anything at all. In fact, they've canceled some drone programs. At the same time, another drone idea that's been making headlines lately is the concept of electric air taxis. It's a prospect that's captured the imaginations of quite a few developers and investors who are sinking huge sums of money into the notion that one day you might get from downtown to an airport, or from the airport to downtown, or maybe even commute to and from a city job from the suburbs, not by car or bus or train, but by going to a vertiport, climbing into an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and then flying to your destination and landing at another vertiport. And in its purest form, you would make that flight either by yourself or with one or two other passengers, but with no pilot aboard, because these electric air taxis would use computers to fly themselves. Well, today we want to talk to a couple of key people from the US and European regulatory agencies who are trying to figure out how to make some or all of this vision of a drone evolution work and work safely. From the Federal Aviation Administration here in Washington, we have Sabrina Saunders-Hodge, Acting Deputy Executive Director of the FAA's Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office. From the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA as it's known, we have Maria Algar-Ruiz, EASA's Drone Program Manager, who joins us today from Cologne, Germany. To offer another European perspective on the drone integration issue, we also have with us Mr. Janusz Januszewski, Chief Executive Officer of Poland's Air Navigation Services Agency, which controls Poland's airspace under EASA's regulatory umbrella. We thank him for signing on today from Athens, Greece, where he happens to be working on drone integration issues. And after we've heard from those aviation safety practitioners, we're going to get some comment and questions from one of the premier aviation journalists in the world, Graham Warwick, Executive Editor for Technology of Aviation Week and Space Technology, a publication that's sold as a mere magazine, but regarded by most people in the business as the Bible of the aerospace industry. If Aviation Week reports it, it's taken as gospel. We're going to ask our guest today to tell us why the civilian drone revolution people were predicting a decade or so ago hasn't happened. But the overarching question we hope to shed light on is what these regulators are doing to integrate civilian drones into the existing air traffic management systems that keep air travel so remarkably safe. Drones these days range in size from little electric quadcopters you can hold in one hand to, in the military, jets as big as airliners. And all of these flying machines are, after all, defying the law of gravity. So safety is a primary concern. So let me turn first. I want to ask Sabrina Saunders-Hodge of the FAA and Maria Algar-Ruiz of EASA first to give us a sort of overview of what their agencies have done to create regulations for drones over the past decade or so. So that we have a sense of the field that we're playing on. Could I ask you to start, Sabrina?
Certainly. Thank you, Rick. Good morning, everyone. So for the FAA, the categories we have defined can be divided by size of drone, small or large, and type of operation, recreational, commercial, and public. First, I'll start with the small drones. Most everyone knows the category where they weigh more than 0.55 pounds, but less than 55 pounds, including everything on board or otherwise attached to the drone, so the complete system. So for recreational users and flyers, we look at them as using drones for recreational purposes, for just enjoyment. They would need to follow the safety guidelines of an FAA recognized community-based organization. They would need to keep their drone within visual line of sight or use a visual observer who is located physically next to or in direct communication with the drone operator. They would need to give way and not interfere with traditional aircraft, fly below 400 feet in controlled airspace under only with a prior authorization, or fly at or below 400 feet in uncontrolled airspace. The operator must take the recreational UAS safety test and carry that completion certificate with them at all times. Their drone must have a marking on the exterior with the registration number. And most importantly, they must not operate their drone in a dangerous manner. So that's our recreational landscape. For commercial operations, we have implemented 14 CFR Part 107, commonly known as the Small UAS Rule. Part 107 allows for routine commercial use of UAS within visual line of sight. While this rule is often touted as the commercial rule, people operating for recreational purposes can also operate under this rule. Although this rule went into effect in 2016, the recent amendment to our Part 107 rule now permits routine operations over people and over moving vehicles, and at night under certain conditions. We also have Part 135 certification is a regulatory path for drone delivery. So Rick talked about that beyond visual line of sight. So as Rick mentioned, right now we only have 3 companies that have this certification now: Amazon, Wing, and UPS. Part 137 applies to drones used for agricultural operations to dispense or spray substances such as pesticides. Then we move to the public aircraft operations, and these are operated by government agencies, either at the federal, state, local, or tribal level, and also public safety entities. So for example, law enforcement, firefighting, border patrol, disaster relief, search and rescue. So public operators have 2 options for operating drones under 55 pounds. They can fly under Part 107, or they can fly under the statutory requirements for public aircraft. So in contrast to small drones, larger drones weighing more than 55 pounds can operate under Part 91. They would need a certificate of waiver or certificate of authorization, or a memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding between the using agency and FAA headquarters. So I hope that gives you an idea of how we break things down.
Yes, thank you. Very, very nicely done. Maria, could you give us a similar sort of overview of the European regulatory framework?
Thank you very much, Richard, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting us to this interesting panel. And happy to meet Sabrina, even if it is virtually. So I will briefly clarify our regulatory framework. So we follow an operation-centric and risk-based approach, which was developed under JADUS, and our regulations that were adopted in 2019, so the 947 and 945 2019 regulations, so European regulations directly applicable in all European member states, classify in accordance with the operations. So the operations are open, specific, and certified, so with increasing risk to the operations. In the open, very similar to the recreational rules in the US, is the operations shall be conducted in visual line of sight, below 150 meters of the height, and the drone is subject to what we call a CE marking. So it's a marking given by a notified body of the drone meeting European standards. When the drone weighs more than 250 grams, and depending, of course, of the cameras, so the operators needs to have an electronic identification, direct electronic identification and network, depending on where the drone is flying. They need to have the operator needs to register the drone, and they need to have a geo-awareness system as well. And all this is part of the European standard based on which the CE marking is given. The remote pilot have full responsibility with regard to the aerospace aspects, needs to have the drone in visual line of sight. And it will be depending on how far the operations will be conducted from people. They will need to have a certificate or of theoretical knowledge complemented by some sort of practical assessment. So this regulation is at the moment an implementation phase by the all European member states, and the availability of standards will be as from next year for the CE marking of all these drones. Then we have the operations in the specific categories. So as soon as one of these conditions is exceeded, for instance, you want to operate your drone in beyond visual line of sight, or you want to operate above 150 meters, or your drone exceeds 25 kilos, so you enter immediately in the specific category, and then you need an authorization by your national aviation authority, so the local aviation authority, in accordance with a specific operational risk assessment conducted. That's where we use the JARUS SORA methodology for a specific operational risk assessment. And here you have a whole range of operations from very similar to the open category to operations with larger drones, which are conducting, for instance, for surveillance. In this specific operational risk assessment is where, for instance, MANA, the company you have highlighted before, is operating in Ireland for drone delivery, following very specific rules. As soon as the risk in the specific category is increasing, in certain higher, medium to higher risk, the competent authority, so the local authority, may request what we have created, a sort of design verification. So it's not a type certificate, it's an assessment of certain aspects of the drone, such as the flight termination system, by EASA. So EASA does a design verification according with a specific special conditions for small UASs, and we issue a design verification report. As soon as the risk increase, so I'm going from now in the specific category to our higher risk, this may not be sufficient, and we may need a type certificate issued by EASA, or a restricted type certificate, depending on the operation. And then when we go to a point where we want to transport passengers, or we want to fly over assembly of people, or we want to transport dangerous goods, we enter immediately on the certified category. And the approach that we will follow is the same that for manned aviation. So the drones has a TC, the operator has a AOC, the remote pilot will need to be issued with a license. So the whole maintenance requirements will apply. For the latest, we have not yet the framework, so we are working with that, and we hope to issue a notice of proposed amendment towards the end of 2022 or 2023. In addition, we have a work stream related to aerospace aspects based on the European regulatory framework. And this is where we have approved this year the regulation. So the European Commission and the member states have approved the regulation on Airspace, so our UTN, Unmanned Traffic Management. And this is the first phase of Airspace implementation, which which require the member states to establish the first aerospace as from 26th of January 2023. And for these first phases of aerospace, we are considering is not limited, but in the regulation, but we are thinking more on lower level aerospaces. And we have in mind, of course, the first use cases that will be flying in the aerospace, which is more likely to be the specific category, the lower end of the specific category, and the open category. And that is why we have, in the U.S.-based aerospace, we have at the moment 4 services that for UAS traffic management that we consider will be sufficient for the traffic complexity that we will face in the years to come. This regulatory framework will evolve with the time as soon as we have more traffic density and complexity. And then for the bigger drones, as soon as we have drones, but this is so far, we have no application, but as soon as we have drones, we will be certified in accordance with IFR rules. We will follow, of course, the rules and procedures for IFR. So this is at the moment the regulatory framework that we have in Europe, and we are in regulatory development and implementation, and I think Pansa will explain how this is then implemented in an European member state.
Okay, well, thank you, Maria. And so Janusz Januszewski, as director of an agency that has to work within the rules that the regulators create, what do you think about these regulatory frameworks for drones, what they've come up with so far and where things are going?
Hello, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those who are in Europe. Of course, from my perspective, regulatory framework is one of the most important. This is one of the most important fundamentals which we have to have in a whole system, in the whole ecosystem. So, I mean, the whole aviation system. Maria and Sabrina just described how important is that, and how many regulations and procedures we have to put or we have to have in mind. So how many areas we have to cover, and this is very important. Of course, what is the main thing that's putting in place the regulation 947, 945 in Europe gives to me and gives to every drone user the unification. So according to the one standard, one legal framework, we can use the European airspace in a safety matter. This is very, very important. And from my perspective, what I have to do as the air navigation service provider, as the CEO of the PANSA, I have to bring to the airspace users the proper tools, the proper systems to use the drones in a safety matter, which is fulfilling not only the regulations which are in place, but also describes all that very difficult things and procedures in a very simple way, because drone users, as you said, as we said, there are simple persons who are using those devices, those vehicles, unmanned vehicles on daily basis. So we have to give them the technological solutions which would give them the opportunity to use the airspace in safety matter. And we've been doing that for many years, because we started in Poland our journey with drones since 2009. We had our own regulation, then we implemented the European regulations. So those drones users who are certified, they can use the Polish airspace or the European airspace freely, using, for example, the PANSA UTM system, the most now advanced systems, which is giving, which is describing the whole environment and is creating the environment in the European airspace. What is most important now for us is the U-Space regulation, which I really hope will be in place, will be deployed in the European legal framework until in January 2023, because it would give us the possibility to use the drones in the way how you were describing, Richard. So how the Jeff Bezos said that in 2018 the drones will be delivering packages to the customers, because what is missing now, the full environment which will allow to integrate that drones, that unmanned aerial vehicles, and will give the opportunity to use drones on the very large scale. For example, I'm always giving that example that in Poland, very small city, we could deliver about 3,600 packages every day in a very small city between the 10,000 up to 25,000 citizens. But we need to have a really complex environment based on 4 or even 5 main pillars, and the legislation is one of the most important. What we discovered in Poland when we were developing the system, the PANSA UTM system, that the biggest challenge was the legal framework, and put into digital version, into IT system, the mirror of the legal procedures of the legal framework. As you said, because you ask why we don't use drones on very large scale, and Sabrina and Maria just answered, because there are so many areas which we have to describe, which we have to describe the procedures, how to operate in the safety matters, that it takes a time. But what is important, and this is what I wanted to highlight. Tomorrow will be 118th anniversary of the first flight of the Brothers flight. Exactly on the 14th of December 1903, there was the first 36-meter fly, and it took 180 years to have all the regulations in, I would say, manned aviation. We started to use the drones approximately 10 years ago, and we are where we are now. So within 10 years, comparing 118 years to the 10 years, we really did a huge step forward, and this is a great achievement. And I do believe that if we're gonna have a proper IT solution, the proper technology based on the trajectory management, based on the legal framework, based on the tracking system, and the other things, we will be able to really integrate within the next 5 years fully into the market, into the business drones. And that's my perspective on that. And we as the PANSA, we are working very closely with ASA. Our experts are almost every day over there and are taking part in every meeting to create a really good, health and friendly legal environment for the drone purposes and for the drone integration into aviation transport. And I truly believe that because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, it will really speed up now.
Well, thank you, Janusz, and I think your comments actually provide a perfect place for me to ask that. Sort of modify the question I was going to ask, which was I was going to ask all of you when you think the Jeff Bezos vision will come true. But let me ask it this way instead. And Graham, I would love for you to comment on this as well. What is the bigger hurdle, regulation or technology?
You want me to kick off?
Sure.
So I want to just start by saying that, I think it's generally accepted that drones kind of took the regulators by surprise. Nobody really expected the drone market, the small drone, the DJI drone type of market to take off the way that it did. And really the first few years were about bringing order to chaos. There were lots of users that didn't understand aviation, didn't understand regulation, and the regulators had to bring order to chaos. So in the case of the US, that led to Part 107, which was a way of approaching how you would bring order to that one. And Europe had a similar process they went through. And then the next thing that in the US particularly was, having sort of got the rules in place, the next big issue was security. And that's where we got to remote identification. Now, both of these regulations took a very long time to put in place, because in the case of the Part 107, you were talking about users that had nothing to do with aviation, that had to be brought in to the discussion. And in the case of remote ID, you brought the security community in, because we were worried about these drones. So, but in the end, we got to a regulation, we got to an agreement on remote ID. And what that has done is set up the foundation for, as has been mentioned several times, this beyond visual line of sight operation, which is really where drones become economically feasible or economically beneficial. And we're sort of moving along to that way, but all this work had to be done before we could get to that. And you know, what you're hearing also here is a very different approach, or what appears to be a very different approach from the FAA and the EASA. But you have to realize that the scenarios they operate in are very different. The US is a monolithic regulatory environment as far as the FAA is concerned. Europe is a series of countries that and this started out with local regulation and eventually became European regulation. So Europe has to do rules that it can deploy across the continent that an operator in Poland can use to fly somewhere else. If you, I mean, you know, there has to be. So Europe has taken this very approach of doing all these regulations because it's trying to create an open and market. The FAA goes case by case as it learns. It learns by doing case by case waivers, approving waivers, etc., etc. But both processes end up with the same result: is you get experience, you get data, you get what you need to then put a formal regulation in place, which is where the FAA is going with the more advanced drone capabilities. It's building up its understanding case by case, project by project as it goes forward. And I just want to say that, you know, you mentioned air taxis, and I think, as I pointed out here, the drones took the regulators by surprise, but they learned from that. And what I see when I look at the air mobility market is the regulators are very much more ready. They're engaged with the companies. They are anticipating the requirements, and they're also building on the foundation of the drones. We've heard about UTM, we've heard about USpace. Those are both the foundations for air mobility when it comes along. That you can extend UTM, you can extend UPS to give the services to enable these things. So the regulators are in a much better place. Now, we've all gone to a risk-based safety approach to safety, which is great because it means you don't treat a DJI drone the same way as you do a passenger carrying drone, but you can learn from both. And so when we get to UAM, that risk ratchets up many more levels because you're talking about carrying passengers, but it's on the same continuum. The learning transfers across. So we're in better position going forward. That said, going back to answering your question, you're absolutely right. We're not where we thought we would be. And it's really because we've been taking this risk-based approach of learning, framing regulations that are appropriate to the actual risk of the operation, which the FAA does by analyzing a waiver request, which the EASA does by setting these open and specific, and the SORA, which is basically just a methodology for assessing risk and putting in things that allow you to mitigate the risks that you identify when you look at your operation. By taking that risk-based approach, we are moving forward and we are getting operations approved. You just look at the US. In the last few months, we've had announcements of delivery operations in several sites in the US, which is the result of the FAA getting more confident that these operations are safe. You're seeing the EASA move forward to publish the standards and the implementation standards that allow this. So you will see in the next 2 years quite an uptick in deployment of actual services because the regulators are getting more comfortable and because the operators have a piece of paper they can look at that tells them what they can or can't do. And that's what's taken so long to get to, is that document that says you can or you can't do this, or if you want to do this, you have to do this, 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 and this first. That's what everybody's been trying to get to. Those documents are, those rules, and the experienced people behind it are all getting in place. So I think we are going to see a rapid rise in these because we have got to that point.
So Maria, would you like to follow up on what Graham's just talked about and tell us if we're nearing a point of acceleration in the integration of drones?
I think so. I think I can agree with Graham that this is what we expect will happen. So most of the operators needed, of course, to have piece of regulations ready out there. There are other aspects, however, I think they play an important role on the further development of the drones, in particular for package delivery. I think for agriculture, surveillance, and all these, what we call limited ground race-based drones operations, they will grow exponentially when the operators will get more clarity on the rules and procedures. And for instance, in Europe, we have developed what we call a standards scenario, which is a sort of declarative process, which allow many of these agriculture, for instance, applications to get approvals a little bit easy, provided that the NSPs have done an airspace assessment and they facilitate this, of course. For package delivery, there is, of course, an important point in addition to security, which is also quite important, but it's of course the societal acceptance as well of those drones to deliver package. In Europe, EASA conducted a study on societal acceptance, and our results of the study was that in addition to the safety requirement that the community more or less give for granted that we have already a safe framework and the regulations are there, there is aspects such as security, noise, but also the European citizens have to voice their concerns with regard to the impact on wildlife that those drones may have. So the impact on environment and sustainability is equally important at the moment in the European citizens' mind, and as well as other impacts such as the noise pollution, of course, but they play an important role. So we need equally to deal with those societal concerns and address them at the same time if the goal is to promote this type of drone package delivery in the near future.
Well, Maria, let me, what you've just said goes to a point, an audience question has come in that goes to that point about the environment. And the question is, who is studying the environmental impact of drones on, say, birds? Are they dangerous to birds, the small ones that fly at low level? But also, is anyone evaluating the positive side, such as how using electric drones instead of gas-powered cars and trucks to deliver packages might cut carbon pollution? Can you, I don't know if that falls under your agency's purview, but
yeah, so we are, so the overall sustainability change, so we are having several studies to evaluate, in particular to put some requirements. And we are working also with the European Commission, which is developing drone strategy 2.0 to be published in 2022. And those tasks that EASA cannot take to address societal concerns, such as what is the impact on wildlife and how we can measure and how we can overcome that and how we can address those tasks that they are outside the scope of EASA, which in the case of wildlife protection or positive impact evaluation is a little bit the case. We turn to the Commission to try to see if the Commission can address this as a wider portfolio of tasks that they plan to do in the next year. So studies, research, and promotion campaigns that they will undertake as for the next year, because the Commission political agenda on sustainability and greener mobility in general is quite high.
Yeah, Sabrina, can you comment on those points for us?
Absolutely. I want to first applaud Graham and Maria for painting a very accurate picture of certainly where I reminisce with NASA colleagues about, we went to sleep, we woke up one day and all of a sudden small UAS were here. And we had been working the integration of large UAS for so many years, and I was managing the research portfolio for it. To the point with regard to, you asked about whether you would see an acceleration, in the coming years. I just want to reflect that in those 8 years that you mentioned, since, Bezos thought that things would be further along in 5 years, the FAA has accelerated and done a lot. We have developed an integration roadmap. We have stood up test sites. We allowed for commercial drone operations under our Section 333 exemptions. We implemented a Know Before You Fly campaign because, as Graham said, now we were dealing with people that didn't have an aviation background, and we had to figure out how to balance that and educate that sector on what does it mean to be in the aviation domain. So what do you need to know to embrace safety before you fly? The small UAS registration rule, we put that into effect. We had our first UAS package delivery in the 2016 timeframe under Part 107. And we launched our UAS integration pilot program, again, going to something that Graham said. FAA needed to test a little, see operations evolve so that we could assess the risk of certain operations under certain conditions and take that knowledge and feed it back into, okay, how can we mitigate or how can the user mitigate any risks that we have identified? And we are moving on with that large nut to crack, which is beyond visual line of sight. So now we have a program dedicated to called Beyond, which is looking at that very type of operation that will really accelerate commercial use of drones. So we have done a lot in that time frame. But to Maria's point, we can follow the science and the technological advancements, all day long for proving operations safe. But the public ultimately influences the acceptance of a certain level of risk or impact by considering the benefits. No different from sitting behind home plate at a baseball game. Very dangerous, people get hurt, but the enjoyment is of benefit. So, it has to evolve, over time. So as far as environmental, we have an entire environment and energy organization within FAA, and we are in the UAS integration office coupled at the hip with them for waivers that we do to allow operations, because there are a lot of environmental aspects. And with regard to wildlife and looking at that, we're fortunate that we have a center of excellence for unmanned aircraft systems called Assure. We are doing research with them. One of the lead universities is University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And so they do look at, the impacts of UAS on wildlife. So we have our fingers, I think, in every piece of the pie. We have to, because there's so many considerations for flying in the NAS.
Right. Well, let me ask you, there's a lot of public acceptance is so important, and there's a lot of public misunderstanding about what the risks are or how great the risks are. And so I'd like to just ask you, all four of you, to comment on a couple of points that come up from time to time. Hobby drones have proven to be a hazard for conventional aviation from time to time. It's not a regular event, but there have been a number of cases of hobby drone flyers getting too close to commercial or general aviation aircraft. And your regulations forbid that, but they're very hard to enforce. So, so I'm wondering, you know, how do you assess the risk of, how are you doing in enforcing those regulations? And then also, you know, in China recently, as I'm sure all of you know, a group of about 200 little drones that were being used to do a light show just suddenly fell out of the air all at once. I don't think anyone was injured, but I think a lot of people, when they hear stories like that, say, well, see, are these things really safe? How would you respond to people who have fears of drones based on incidents like this? Sabrina, do you want to start since we're...
Okay, thank you. So just taking your last point first, with regard to, I am not familiar with what happened in China, but with regard to that, but I will say that the FAA has successfully allowed light shows for huge public events like our Super Bowl and others. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't want people to take that, incident that happened as an indication that drones, inherently impose, a large safety risk, because we have examples of the opposite. So we demonstrated that. When we talk about public acceptance within our integrated pilot program, it's going to take community by community by community to really start weighing out the benefits for the introduction of drone use in their areas. So the IPP that was partnered with San Diego, they partnered with Uber to conduct operational demonstrations of food delivery. So that community has seen the benefits. They've witnessed it, they felt it, they received food, so it's going to take an incremental step. Our North Carolina Department of Transportation, they have demonstrated partnering with healthcare facilities, so when health is involved and being able to, service the public with medical supplies or rendering service, no one can argue with that benefit. So the people in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and a retirement community in Florida, they have been exposed to the benefits. So I think it's just going to be, we have to crawl. We always say crawl, walk, run. We're going to need to crawl, walk, and then run as we show these benefits and people feel those benefits in their lives, so certainly the NAS, the US is a large body, and it's going to take time, but there are benefits, and we are responsible for ensuring the highest level of safety. So we're not going to rush it. We never compromise on safety.
Thanks. Maria, you want to comment on this?
Yes, sure. As a little bit as Sabrina has said, actually, those incident, I wasn't aware about that incident either. And we have also a live show, actually, one which was reviewed by EASA, but it was approved by DGSE France. It was for the 14th of July, also live show with very little drones, and it was very well organized and was conducted in a safe, professional manner. Yeah, I want to state, as Sabrina says, so we have many examples like catastrophe management, where the use of drones has proved to be extremely beneficial for the society, and they are accepting that. latest examples, it was the volcano eruption in Canary Island. They were using drones actually for evaluating the overall damage, and actually they were evacuating the people out of their houses based on the evolution. That I don't know if you could have been able to do that with a manned aircraft. Another example, it was when there was the flood in Germany. So they were using drones actually to evaluate the situation and also help with evacuation of people. And those cases have shown to the society that drones are there to help them, and they are accepting that. So it is true that we have also experienced certain cases like the incident in Gatwick, several incidents in Fraport, where the drones incursions could have been also even risk for commercial transport operations. What we believe is important to do a lot of campaigns when those drones are being sold to society. So we put a lot of emphasis to go on campaigns and to reach out to the community, which are not really aviation experts. So basically to reach out to the distributors of those drones, that they make sure that the buyers, they get a flyer with the do's and don'ts very easily. They make links to videos which are drones for dummies, and try to educate the general public very easily of what it is a good practice to fly a drone and what is not, what something they shouldn't do. Of course, we cannot prevent the what I will call those who have malicious intentions, because those who have malicious intentions know very well what they can do. But with sort of what we call safety campaigns, we try to educate those drones operators, which they want to operate the drones safely, but they may not be able or not be educated enough in aviation to understand all rules and procedures. And we find it that is equally important to do, and we try to put a lot of emphasis on those safety campaigns. We have released recently, actually today or yesterday, we released another campaign for Christmas for people who want to buy a drone. So what exactly they need to know for fly drones safely.
Yeah, so public education is one of the, Janusz, I got the feeling you might want to comment on this. Am I reading your text correctly?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Exactly, because of course the education is one of the most important part and the most crucial part, but also what we need to give to the people, because the people who are using the drones are not familiar very with the procedures. As I said at the beginning, Maria and Sabrina described a lot of procedures and the rules which are in the air and which are covering now the drones, but we need to give to the people a simple technological solution. So simple equipment like the application, which gives them opportunity to fly in the air in the safety manner. And this is one of the important things. One is the legal framework, education, campaigns. We started such campaigns in Poland in 2017, and every year together with the Polish Civil Aviation Authority, we are preparing as the PANSA the full campaigns how to fly safely in the Polish airspace. But what is important is the technology and the systems which are allowing to use the drones in safe manners, not knowing anything about the regulations. And this is how we created our technological solution, the PANSA UTM, which is cooperating with one of the applications, which gives you only 3 marks in the simple missions. So I mean, using by the people you have the 3 stages. First is the green stage, so the green light, so you can use the drone freely. You have the orange, where you have to fulfill some requirements, and then you have the red light, when you have to ask the air traffic controller how to use the drone, how to find the mission, how fulfill the mission. And this is, in my opinion, what is needed. So the system, which will be very similar to the ATM systems, but much more advanced. And this is what we have to do. And this is what we are doing. And earlier you were mentioning if we started a journey, if we are in the breaking point, I truly believe that we are doing a lot of things and we are increasing. I will give you just small numbers. In 2020, in our PASA UTM, we have 300,000 check-ins. So the missions of the drones, comparing to the general aviation, it was higher, bigger number, bigger score, because we had 280,000 of general aviation movements in the Polish airspace. And in 2021, after deploying of the EU regulation in January 2021, that number will be doubled in Polish airspace. So it means that that revolution is now started and is ongoing, and we are speeding up and we are doing a lot of things to give really to the environment, to the business, a full ecosystem which will fulfill the requirements of the drone users. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and Graham, I'd like to ask you to comment too. One of the things that I've heard from some people in industry is that the regulations may be too strict, that maybe drones are being held up to higher standards than manned aviation. I don't know, I'd like Graham for you to comment on that idea, and also the technological question.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. I mean, we have two very different pieces to what we're talking about here. We have the recreational drone, and I think there you were talking about helping that recreational user understand the airspace, accountability, making sure that they know that they're accountable for their behavior. And then you've got the commercial side, and the commercial side is where this risk-based approach to approving operations is concerned. Give you your example of the drones falling out of the sky. If that operation was run according to US or American rules, and US or European rules, and China uses SORA, uses the JARIS rules, they would have had to go through the process to say that there is a risk that these things will fall out of the sky. Therefore, we will mitigate that risk by making sure nobody's underneath the drones. Those drones are perfectly safe to fall out of the sky because there was nothing underneath them that would be damaged, no person or no things like that. That is what this risk-based safety is about. You look at your operation, you identify the risks, because there always will be risks. There's risks with manned aviation every time we take off. And you say to the regulator, this risk I will mitigate with this method. This risk I'll mitigate with, right? That's what you do on the commercial side. Now, the commercial side has a real problem. As that EASA study showed, the public, the aviation has set such a high safety bar. The public expects that level of safety from anything to do with aviation. They don't understand why there are pieces of aviation that are not that safety. General aviation is nowhere near as safe as commercial aviation. Airplanes fall out of the sky every day in general aviation. And we kind of just let it happen, right? As far as the public's concerned. But the public, if you go and talk to the public about aviation, they will point at the airlines and say, I want it to be as safe as that. So that's why this risk-based approach that the regulators are taking is trying to drive the industry to that. Anybody in the commercial world that says that the regulations are too tight simply hasn't had something happen to them yet. As soon as they have something bad happen to them, they'll be coming back to the regulator saying, you didn't make it tight enough, right? I mean, we're at that birthing stage of an industry, and everybody's pushing to make money and to deliver some benefit. And the regulators are trying to enable that. But the public expects the highest level of safety. So the regulators have to put regulations in place that strive to deliver the highest level of safety.
Right,
Now,
and that level of safety is incredible, isn't it?
It's higher than almost any other form. I mean, I think it is higher than any other form of transportation. So if you hold a handheld drone to the same level of safety as a Airbus A350, A380, you make that handheld drone unaffordable. And there is no recreational drones at that point, because you've got 10 to the minus 9 chance of failure in this thing in your hand, and it costs you $150,000. Right? So it's getting that. And that's what I think the really encouraging thing for me is to watch the regulators over time move from a monolithic approach to looking at safety to a spectrum. I mean, the FAA talks about this spectrum and has a spectrum where they say, and Maria talked about ground-based risk. You know, I mean, then that is really what it's all about. It's the risk on the ground and the risk of bumping into something. And what the regulators have done, I think, that is revolutionary, if you actually look at a 5-year period of time or a 8-year period of time, is move to this risk-based thinking from the beginning of regulating, rather than sort of like adapting it as you go along. They've said, no, we have to come out of the box using risk of the specific operation, and that specific operation could be a nationwide delivery network, but it's still a type of operation. And you regulate to the risks associated with that specific type of operation. And I think that's a revolutionary approach for aviation regulation. And it is ultimately what will unlock the drones. It's just a really long process to get to it.
Well, let me ask all 4 of you to give us your, make us a bet on how long it will take then for the Jeff Bezos vision for small drone delivery to be realized. How long will it be before small package delivery is part of everyday life for all of us, or will it ever be?
Can I jump in and I'll let the experts talk then? I think that Bezos's vision is not the one I think that's going to take off, right? I mean, medical drones maybe. I think regional drone cargo transportation, warehouse to warehouse, warehouse to distribution center to superstore, retail superstore. I think that is going to be a huge market, and I think it'll be a big market before door-to-door drone delivery becomes a big market.
Interesting. What, Maria? What's your prediction?
So a little bit more like Graham. So when, I mean, you have seen, and it is happening today. So MANA drones delivery is delivering package to the community which need it. So it's happening in certain areas where that community need it, and what that community find it brings a benefit for them. Now in big cities, I don't know if this is something to be deployed in the next 5 to 10 years. It depends. In big cities, one needs to see also many other technical aspects of those routes, concerns to battery endurance, and basically some of the areas and some of the mitigation means that maybe just simply made it not possible at the beginning. So I think in the next 5 years, we will see more of these small remote communities developing, such as MANA is implementing in Ireland, where it makes an added value. So in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, we may see something in the cities, but I don't see this happening, for instance, in big cities in the next 10 years. But yes, that is my guess. We will see.
Sabrina, would you agree with Maria for the situation in the US? Do you see drone delivery happening in big cities at all, or being a regular feature of everyday life in smaller localities?
Like Maria said, we've experienced them today, deliveries, and we're learning from those. As I mentioned earlier, we are almost at the end of our Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, where we're receiving input from industry that will help us to influence a rule for Beyond Visual Line of Sight operations. And that is a huge nut to crack. But I'd say, yes, like Maria said, within 5 years, rulemaking for us is a lengthy process. We solicit comments, we have to do the research, all of that. So I see it coming. When we look at our spectrum, as Graham alluded to, that FA has, we look at those, large, cargo deliveries on the upper scale of more complexity and more risk. So, we are, working towards that, but that is the quadrant that those are in. Our trials are with the small UAS that are, hopefully, less risk if they do happen to fall out of the sky. We've done a lot of research to get them to the point of operations over people and moving vehicles, so that they don't inflict great harm. But I did want to circle back just one and to talk about the balance on educating the public and what have you. FA certainly is putting within our safety net, looking at counter UAS, because I know my colleagues have kind of talked about it. In addition to educating the population, we still have to put in a safety net, and we like to say to address the clueless, the careless, and the criminals. And so we are actively testing drone detection technologies at our airports, so that on takeoff and landing, we can mitigate any risks should a drone, again, careless, clueless, criminal, enter into that airspace. So we are putting a lot of emphasis. We have a whole security line of business looking at that, and we work closely with them. So there's a balance between education and then just that safety net to where the education, falls through.
Yeah. Janusz, would you like to join in?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I fully, I would say that I'm not agree with Maria, because in my opinion, within the next coming 5 years, we really will have a lot of drones, like the hive of drones in the cities. And I know that there's a lot of work to do, but what is missing? The main question we have to ask, why the Bezos is not has not fulfilled his sentence, that we are missing a full environment which will allow to integrate the drones, because we are saying a lot of about the SORA, about the regulation. This is one of the fundament. Second fundament which we need to have is the ground infrastructure which allow to track every airspace users within the airspace. And this is what we are missing now in probably whole world, to have a full tracking system. Then we need to have the UAV traffic management systems, which will be integrating manned and unmanned traffic together with managing the airspace values, because this is what about Maria was saying about the cities. Last year in Poland, in Warsaw, we did pilotage of carrying the COVID samples, and we did that in the Warsaw, in the city center, in the very complex area where we described all the map, 3D map of the Warsaw city, and we prepared a special procedure to carry by the drones the COVID samples. Also, we did the pilotage on the large scale, on the long distance between Warsaw and the cities surrounded the Warsaw. So so on the distance of 80 kilometers. And of course, what we need is two last pieces, so the mature producer market and also the algorithms, which will allow in the future to manage a hive of drones, like 1,500 drones in a very small pieces of the airspaces. This is what we are doing now, and what we are preparing. Pansa UTM system is the first certified system in the European airspace, and now is allowing to integrate the drones. This is what I said at the beginning, that in 2021 we had until the end of November almost 600,000 movement check-ins in our Pansa UTM system of drone users of the drone missions. This is the picture of the journey which we started, and I truly believe that with such solutions, with the cooperation, with the risk mitigation, this is what Graham was saying about the ground risk mitigation, we will create the whole ecosystem, the whole environment, integrating the drones, and the drones will become a part of our daily lives.
Well, that's a technology question, I guess, and so I'd like to ask Graham as our technologist here, and Sabrina for the U.S. What are the chances of us? What are the possibilities of getting a low altitude drone air traffic control system operational in U.S. airspace? Where do we stand on that technologically?
Technologically, I think a lot. As Janusz has pointed out, you've got to be able to track everything that moves now. You can't just track above a certain size. You have to, in essence, be able to track everything. So I think that a lot of it's going to have to do with 5G, and to what extent we can use 5G to maintain a constant, electronic conspicuity. I'm not sure. You have to be able. We're going to have to use 5G to be able to see everything all the time, and 5G has the ability to operate in complex environments. You can have, whereas some of the other communication systems can't. 5G, you can have, multiple ground stations that will give you the coverage of the urban canyons and all that sort of stuff. So I think in the end, 5G is going to be very, very, very important to this. We're getting started using ADSB, which is the existing aviation technology for where you broadcast your position and then that gets downloaded into air traffic management. That is not extensible to the sheer number of drones we're talking about. It physically can't. The frequencies can't cope with that. So we have to go to another system for this low altitude airspace. And I think 5G is I think the answer. Now we're getting started in some areas. This BV loss, we're getting started by having ground detect and avoid. We have radars that have been modified to be able to track, but that tends to be a bit larger UAVs. And obviously, at some point or other, we have to get sense and avoid into every above a certain size. Now you can go buy, a handheld drone today that's got 12 cameras on it or something like that. So it's not that the technology doesn't exist to be able to help a drone see around it and see other things. It's just, how do you, in a certification sense, how do you know that it's seeing is real and it's where it sees it and it is what it thinks it is? And that's a process that we're going through. We've defined, for larger drones, we've defined what's called well clear, which kind of is, if you're a manned pilot, it's written into the regulations, you have to stay well clear of other traffic. And you do that, there's rules for that, but you use your eyes to do that. And you can augment that with radar or ADSB or something like that. We've defined those rules for large, high-flying, large predator type UAVs. We can do well clear for that. And we can have a radar on that can see things around. We're in the process, I think, of getting to a point where we understand what well clear means for a little drone and what types of sensors that drone would need to be able to see at a certain size target at a certain distance away in a way that you can prove that it's safe. So that's another technology. So I think that 5G and onboard sense and avoid are pieces of this that are going to come.
Or artificial intelligence, which will separate the trajectories by themselves. So the computer will be managing the trajectories. And I truly believe that this is the future, not only the sensors which are placed on the platform of the drones, but the systems which will be managing and separating the trajectories in the air and sending the messages to the platforms. That's my point of view.
Right. Sabrina, did you want to say anything on this point?
About
the possibility of low altitude UAV ATC system in the US.
Right. Thank you. So, our FA partners, NASA, certainly developed the concept of operations for UTM, and we were hand in hand with them to make sure that their concept met our understanding of, civil operations. And so since then, we've had 2 phases of a UTM pilot program. So we're testing our data networks. We've built out a infrastructure at our William J. Hughes Technical Center in New Jersey in order to test out, data flows, not only into the FAA, but with our security partners. Because again, going back into the, uncontrolled airspace, we still need to account for, the careless, the clueless, the criminal. So there's just so many dynamics. But yes, we are heavily invested in the benefits to be realized from a traffic management system for those lower altitudes, for those small UAS.
So let me ask all of you just quickly. When we talk about beyond visual line of sight, that's going to be the key to the larger drones being able to share the airspace, I believe. You've all said.
And to the small, because the technologies are not there even for the large. We are still waiting for standard, people to come forward in order to even introduce a standard for detect and avoid technologies for the large, and there is testing going on. But now, how do you miniaturize that to be put on the small? So
right. Well, I'm just wondering, just to put it in larger terms, are we ever going to get to the day where aircraft with no pilots aboard can be used regularly for commerce with on the same kind of file and fly basis that manned aircraft use? Maybe Maria, you haven't spoken in a minute or two. What do you think?
I want to correct first one statement because Janus says he disagrees with me that they will be sooner than in the next 10 years. I wanted to say for medical purpose, yes, I wanted to just clarify that for pizza delivery, I don't see this at the moment, but for medical purpose, actually we have them at the moment, and under the CESAR project, and Poland is very active, and there are a lot of demonstrations out there, and this is definitively something that will happen. As well as we didn't talk about, but this manned VTOL for air taxis, and this is something we see really coming in very short time frame as well. Coming back to the bigger UASs and ARPAs, I think we have then at the moment ARPAs certified for IFR so for military purpose, and I think technically the bottom line, or probably the thing that will tell us whether it's feasible or not, will be the C2 link and the availability of the C2 link, because for those the detect and avoid, we have a logic, we have an aerospace structure, we have a logic, we have rules and procedures as far as those systems will adhere, and the remain well clear. We have a solution, and we have already TICAS as well, so it's an extension of those. So I think, provided that we have C2 link availability, we may have those from the technical point of view easier, because if they are certified in accordance with IFR, what IFR does mean, and they follow IFR procedures, and they detect and avoid is a sort of TCAS extended. Provided that we have that C2 link with those performance, I insist, still the C2 link is the bottom line here, we may be able to have that. Now, if the C2 link will cost too much because we will need to have those C2 link, or the availability of the performance requirements of those are not there, we may not see them. I agree with Janus, then we may need to rely more on artificial intelligence, but then we need a lot of more demonstration and maturity of technology of the onboard assistant to be able to interact with ATC in today's framework. So I will say those, which is what ICAO is working on, and this is where international standards will be applicable as for 2026. In principle, we could have them there, provided that we have that C2 link for this type of operations.
Thanks. So before we have a few minutes left, and I really am fascinated by the electric air taxi movement, and Maria, you referenced it just a moment ago, and I'd love to get all of your views on how realistic that concept is. You know, we have hundreds of people who have been trying to develop these electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and some people envision them being as common in the skies and as cheap to ride as Uber and Lyft and conventional taxis are on the ground today. And I'm just wondering, are you as regulators handling this idea any differently than you are, say, the cargo drone aircraft, the larger cargo drones? And as experts, what do you think of this idea? Is it are we going to have the Jetsons age in a few years, or is this one of those aviation pipe dreams that isn't really going to come true? Who wants to start? Maybe Janus, you haven't spoken in a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think that we'll not avoid that, because I've seen and I've seen a lot of now vehicles which are eVTOL vehicles, especially one who was invented by the Polish guy, and now you can buy it for $92,000 US, and will become very common. So we cannot avoid that, and really we have to do that, and we have to adjust the procedures. And I think that EASA and FAA will stand in the front of the problem that we have to handle very quickly in some way. I do not have an answer really how to regulate that. I'm pretty sure that Maria and Sabrina are knowing better than I about the regulations, possible regulations. But nevertheless, my answer is that we'll not avoid that, and very soon we'll have much bigger number of that kind of vehicles, eVTOL vehicles, which will be in the air, and we have to handle with that. My answer is we need to have the technology, and that will speed up, and that will force us as the regulators and NSPs to prepare a proper tools from the basic of regulatory framework and from the technological point of view, and managing unmanned and manned traffic.
Graham, before I ask Sabrina and Maria to comment on the regulatory view on that, what about you? What do you think of this eVTOL idea?
I suppose my answer is they will build it, but will they come? There is absolutely no doubt these vehicles are coming. There are too many of them, too far along, and too well funded for it not to happen. The jury is out for me on public acceptance, both public acceptance of large flying vehicles in close proximity, but also just use. You know, will people really want to use an air taxi? And the answer is, I can't imagine a future where there isn't a Jetsons type of future. I physically cannot imagine a future where we don't have air taxis. I just never thought it would come in 2025, but now we're looking at it coming in 2025. I'm just not really sure if if the market is ready for them in 2025 or not, or whether it might be 2030 by the time we get a wider ridership. But they are coming, and the technology is there. The initial way of operating, which is to fly like a helicopter, is kind of there. So we can get started. We can have airport shuttles. We can do things that helicopters do today. We can just do them cheaper and cleaner and whatever. But if you're going to really have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people moving around cities with these things, yeah, that's not technology. That is getting the public to buy into the idea of three-dimensional transportation.
Right.
And that's the bit I'm unsure of.
They have to, the public will have to become as comfortable with an eVTOL as they are with an automatic elevator, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, we're in this odd situation where we have one of the leading companies in eVTOL doesn't have a pilot. It has never had a pilot. From day one, they've never had a pilot in their air taxi. And they say that the Chinese regulator will certify them to carry passengers next year. Oddly enough, they're using basically Sora, which is a drone methodology to approve it, but they say they'll get approved to fly passengers in China with no pilot next year. I do not see that happening outside of China for many, many, many years, but it is a real near-term possibility, at least in China.
Maria, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, because a couple of the companies that seem to be making the most progress on this in Europe, so Volocopter is one of them, give me the feeling that maybe this could happen in Europe a little sooner than in the US, but I don't know. How does it look from the regulator's point of view?
So from the regulator point of view, because as Graham was saying, we are at the moment treated then in a similar manner to helicopter operations, and they will start operations with the pilot on board flying VFR at the beginning. Now the question is whether VFR day only or VFR night, with some specific routes or corridors or UAM corridors as they were defining one of the CONOPS by NASA. We aim to have all the regulations and be able to start approving them by 2024, 2025. Now, whether the public will use that service and they will accept to use that service as air taxis, or whether they will be used for ambulance, like today we have HANS operations, so we will have the BENS operations of VTOL emerging medical services. That is something that the time and the citizens will tell us. But from the regulatory point of view, and considering that the initial set of operations for the initial years, for the first years to come, will be very similar to helicopter, but cleaner and more sustainable, we see them very probable by 2024, 2025.
Sabrina, can you give us the view from the FAA?
Sure. Yes, we don't reference, air taxis, but the the advent of these new technologies, the eVTOL vehicles, we feel that they're within our domain of broader concepts for advanced air mobility, AAM. And so we are actively integrating AAM into our planning efforts, working with NASA, and also focusing on 5 pillars: aircraft, airspace, operations, infrastructure, and the community. So I will say that FAA has no current plans to update regulations for near-term AAM operations. We have found that the existing rules are flexible enough to accommodate these operations. So I know AAM is rapidly emerging, and we are keeping pace with it. Again, partnering with our government partner in NASA and with industry to make sure that we stay with and ahead of this evolving technology.
Good. Well, I think that we are almost out of time. I've got one quick audience question I'd like to get you and Maria to comment on, and that is when we get to the point where beyond visual line of sight is possible, how do you feel about cross-border or even cross-Atlantic operations? Can you have any thoughts on that quickly? Okay. Well, I think.
Sorry, I was on mute. You know, we follow ICAO standards. You know, for us, you know, we will, you know, continue to operate under international, you know, guidelines. You know, we already have that framework for manned aircraft. So for us, you know, we will adapt and follow ICAO and our international governance.
I wanted just to say precisely that as far as we follow ICAO, and as I said before, so the aim of ICAO is to have their SARs ready. Well, there is already the SAR for remote pilot license, but the SARs ready and applicable as for 2026, and we have the equivalence approvals in Europe and the US and elsewhere. So I think it's
okay. Well, listen, I hate to interrupt, but I think we're out of time, and I want to thank you all for being with us. I think it's been a terrific webinar, and the video will be available shortly for anyone who wants to go on the Wilson Center website and watch this. And I just say once again, thank you. And just on aviation predictions, I just want to note that in 1936, Orville Wright said the helicopter would not work. And so we can't, Wright was wrong. So on drones, maybe Jeff Bezos will be right. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.